think all members of the royal family have been accused of being gay at one time or the other.
I had an orgy this weekend.
Nobody could bear to explain to Queen Victoria what a lesbian was.
I don't know, I'm not a historian, but doesn't it sort of show up the hypocrisy of the Bible, really? What is the most shocking thing you found?
Does anybody come out of this well?
What it was really like for gay men in London during this period.
Hello, welcome to A Gay and a Non-Gay. I'm James Barr. I'm gay.
Yeah, I'm Dan Hudson and I'm non-gay.
Yes, you are. Yeah. So proud of you, Dan.
Thanks.
Today, we're super excited because we're about to dive in on an incredible anthology called Some Men in London. Some Men in London.
Yeah.
Queer Life, 1945 to 1959. You know I love my gay history, especially in Pride Month.
You do, yeah. And this is quite an extraordinary book. It's a huge collage and anthology of diaries and letters and memoirs and newspaper reports, like trial documents about what life was like for gay men in London, like yourself, James, back in the day.
Well, I wasn't here back in the day, in 1940 to 1950 something. But maybe our guest was the author of the book. Peter Parker joins us. Hello.
Hello.
I'm guessing you weren't also.
No,
you also weren't.
No. not quite.
But you've been looking into this, right?
I was born towards the end of the book, but yes, but it's an area of history that I've been interested in. I've covered elsewhere, having done biographies of J.R. Ackley and Christopher Isherwood. So in fact, I've gone back much further than this book goes.
Wow. Can we talk about the title first? Why did you call it Some Men in London? I love it as a title. It's very funny.
Well, it was originally just going to be called Men in London, and I never liked it. It was on the contract. And then I said to the editor, when I'd sort of delivered the book, I said, I just don't think this title works. And he went away and he came back. He said, what about Some Men in London? And I thought I should like the casualness of it. Oh, this is just Some Men in London.
Yeah.
But it's quite hard for people, because people say it in a different way. But
it's also sort of the kind of thing I would say, like, oh, I had an orgy this weekend. Who weird? Some men in London.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm a big fan. Can you tell us about the genesis of Some Men in London?
Well, in fact, I was approached by Penguin it was Penguin's idea, my editor there, who is a non-gay. He approached me and said, would I do it? And I think he originally had an idea that it would be largely about Soho. And that all those clubs and bars where people those painters like Bacon and people hung out. But I sort of thought, I went away and thought about it, and I thought actually there's a much bigger story to be told. Some of it I knew, having written biographies of gay men in the past, and it was something that I'd always been interested in. And I'm a Londoner by adoption. I came here to university but was brought up in the Welsh borders. So I wrote a proposal, and Penguin said, actually, this proposal is so interesting. Would you actually like to write a history rather than an anthology? And I said, actually, no, let's stick to the anthology. I have to say there were times when I was compiling this anthology, I thought it might be easier to write a history because at least you can control the narrative a bit more. It's also that thing of how much you can cut and how much you can
I'm not a very well-read well-read person, Peter, so I have to explain it. I'm not entirely sure I know what the difference between a history and an anthology is. Well, I only know the Taylor Swift anthology that just got released.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping this is both, that it's an anthology. In other words, it's a collection of pieces from all over the place that adds up to a history. And so there is a commentary throughout where I explain who people are. There are also biographical notes in the back for everybody who's mentioned, so people can look people up if they want to find out a bit more about them. But it's a sort of it's a collage. I think that's what it is. It's a collage of voices, both queer and non-queer, and hostile and friendly. So the idea is it will give you, it'll build up to a picture of what it was really like for gay men in London during this period.
I saw a review of this book, and a journalist said on Twitter that you obviously had a whale of a time compiling it. Or a hoot, I think he said, compiling it.
Yes, that was the Times. Yes, no, I did. I mean, there were times when I had less of a hoot of a time. I mean, trailing through, so many newspaper reports and trying to find. I mean, I was extremely lucky that Bishopsgate Institute. I did. I mean, there were times when I had the lesbian and gay newspaper archive trailing through, which is a fantastic and I think quite underused resource. And it's not. I mean, I was extremely lucky. So there were all sorts of things in the book that didn't come from that. That came through online, the lesbian and gay newspaper microfilm searches. Which is a fantastic, but it did mean that underused resource. These stories were sort of all in one place. Not all of them were relevant, because there was a lot of them about places outside London. A lot of them about lesbians, which don't feature in the book. For a very good reason that female homosexuality has never been criminalised. Not all of them the trajectory of the book is it ends in 1967 with the passing of the Sexual Offences Act. It didn't seem that, for a very good reason, the women that we need some female homosexuality really good lesbian to do a similar anthology. But it would be very different, I think, just simply because of the law.
Why is it? Why was it?
Offences Act. It didn't seem that I think the women we need some.
Nobody
really seems to know. I mean, the anecdote is that it would be very different to explain to Queen Victoria what a lesbian was, and therefore they got let off.
Was she not allegedly?
Well, I think there are.
Wait, what?
I think more members of the royal family. I mean, the anecdote is that one time or the other. But I think also there is something about two women living together in the Victorian period and beyond. I think also there is something about two women. If you saw two men living together in the Victorian period, they didn't find the right women. You wonder what they were up to. And I think that there has always been. If you saw two men living together, that didn't immediately lesbianism the right women. You wonder what they were up to. More, and I think not exactly there has always been, because certainly there's very hostile comments about lesbianism has been the years. More, but not exactly there was sort of some idea that women living together, nobody was going to ask any questions. So a lot of, and of course a lot of women who lived together unmarried weren't idea that women living together for nobody was going to ask.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a historian, but doesn't it sort of show up the hypocrisy of the Bible, really? In that the Bible never mentioned lesbians either, did it? Wasn't it just a man who lies with a man?
Yes.
And so did everyone just read that and follow the letter of that?
And I think it's probably also that women have always been ignored by history. Yes, women have always played a second role until comparatively recently. And I think it's probably also that women have always been ignored. We're not going to bother about women. Women have always played a second role, worthy of our interest recently. I think there's a lot of that. We're not going to bother about women.
That makes a lot of sense.
Not worthy of our interest.
So what was it like reading through the letters, the diaries, the trial documents? Well, like, was it traumatizing or fun? Like,
I mean, I was fairly shocked by some of what I found, though not altogether surprised, because I just knew quite a lot of this history. I mean, I was fairly shocked by some of what I found. I mean, though not it was fun on the whole. I mean, the great thing's like any research for any book. Anyway, you just get those moments where you think, "Oh my God, I mean, this is wonderful. This is fantastic." And you get the great things like any research for any find some letter. You just get those moments where you think, "Oh my God, this is wonderful." So there was always that when you were sort of slogging away going through endless newspaper books, then you found the really great ones. You thought, so there was always that when you were sort of slogging away going through endless newspaper books, then you found the really great ones. You thought, oh well, that's great. I found it. I mean, there are some of the interesting ones. I mean, there's a wonderful interview. I mean, a woman who goes off to conduct an interview with three some of the eligible bachelors. I mean, there's a wonderful why they couldn't find the right interview girl. A woman, and given the playwright Terence Rattigan, the royal couturier Norman Hartnell, why they could playwright Ivan Novello. I think we all know why they didn't find the playwright Terence Rattigan, and you can't quite tell from this whether it's a joke or whether it's or it's an in-joke that the people who know will be saying, and you can't quite tell from this whether it's a joke or whether it's written by a woman who sort of the people very sweet will be saying, I've got my own boyfriend Joe, or whether it's actually why aren't these would they be interested in me? And it's sort of very there's something really charming. I've got my own boyfriend Joe, and he's lovely. I was very pleased to find would they be interested an account, and it's very there's something really charming about who was I was very pleased to find arrested or put on trial, or rather he wasn't put on trial, but he had invited some young men in was for wrestling, arrested or put on trial. We sort of know what that is.
Dan, don't you?
Invited
Yeah, I do,
certain
yeah.
young men and of course one thing led to another, and we sort of know
What's
what
interesting
that
about
is.
Viscount
certainly, as it turns out, he was the older brother
and of course one
Earl
thing
of
led to
Arran,
another,
who was the
and,
man who piloted the
what's interesting
Sexual
about Viscount
Offences
Sudley
Act to
is it
decriminalise
turns out
homosexuality
he was
through
the
the
older
House of
brother of
Lords,
the Earl of Arran,
and
who
it was
the man
always
who
said
piloted
that
the
Viscount Sudley
Offences
did
Act to
commit
decriminalise
suicide
homosexuality
shortly
through
after
the House
he
of
came
Lords.
to inherit the
And
earldom.
it was always said
but in fact,
that,
a friend of mine,
Viscount Sudley did
fortunately,
commit
at proof
suicide,
stage, so I could
shortly
also
after
said
he
actually he had
seen
seen
the
inherited
death
the
certificate,
earldom.
and actually
This
but
man
in
died
fact,
of
a friend
natural
of mine,
causes. But it was very interesting
proof
that
stage, so I
this
could
this
also
one
said
case that I
actually
just
he had
came
seen
upon
the death
happened to
certificate,
be
and
someone who
this
was
man died of
related to
natural
someone
causes.
but it was very
piloted
interesting
the,
that this one case that I just came through the House of Lords,
someone who was
so that
related
was
to someone
very
who
good.
piloted
There were some pretty shocking things these filthy people through the House of Lords saying, these so that was very good. Must be stamped out. There was a lot of stuff about things these filthy Burgess and McLean case, the two spies, where people were sort of saying, these people. A lot of stuff about outrageous. A very curious thing is that two spies, where they were known as the missing diplomats. They were two. They were very curious thing is that Guy Burgess was an absolute screamer. They were known as the missing diplomats, and a drunk, and completely promiscuous and hopeless. And Guy Burgess was an for some reason the Home Office, the Foreign Office never sort of and a drunk and cottoned on or didn't think that perhaps he wasn't in the best of jobs. For some reason, the Home and then he was a spy. He was never spy for the Soviets.
Cottoned on or didn't.
Yes, he was a foreign agent, as indeed
and then
was his Alan McLean, who was his for the Soviets.
Sorry,
Donald McLean. Yes, he was a foreign agent, as indeed it was. And it was thought when they went off they might have eloped. Though in fact, Donald McLean, who was his, though rumoured to be bisexual, I think it's more likely. And it was thought when they went off they might have eloped. He was married, but drink was his undoing. Anyway, they disappeared, and what they'd actually done is fled to the Soviet Union, and they went. But he was married, but drink was his undoing. And this became an anyway they disappeared, and what thing in the newspapers that homosexuals are not only cluttering up the streets, and this became an enormous thing in the national security. And the reason they're a threat is that they could be blackmailed by any agent who wanted to, who said we'll expose your homosexuality. They could be blackmailed. So that was a big case. But very bizarrely, one of Burgess's best friends who wrote a series of articles for the People newspaper, that was a big case, anonymous, very bizarrely. This is what my friend Guy Burgess's best friend, and it was a very sort of anti-gay piece. But actually, it was Gronwy Rees who has served on the Wolfenden committee that had met to discuss the legalisation of homosexuality. But actually, and he joined it in order to push through the legalisation. So it's very odd. I don't know what he thought he was doing, and of course he joined it in order to push through the legalisation. So it's very odd. I don't know what he thought he was doing.
Really
of course,
blinding me.
oh dear,
When I'm not speaking, I'm like,
okay,
that's
fine.
I'll just hide. I wanted to ask you actually. I mean, we'll talk a lot about what you found. But
that's fine.
You keep saying shocking. I'd love to know. We discussed this before we started recording. What is the most shocking thing you found?
Well, the most shocking piece I found, very by happy coincidence, it happened to be a newspaper report from December 1959. Well, the most shocking piece I found on this note. I have to say that the Metropolitan Police and the psychiatric profession come out of this book extremely bad. I have to say that the Metropolitan Police, I actually have a neighbour who's very high up in the Met. I said, I'm sorry, extremely bad. She said, different times. I actually have a neighbour who's very high up. But this is a newspaper report from December 1959 from the News of the World. Different times.
Rest in peace, News of the World.
And often when there were cases of December 1959 from the News of the World, a psychiatrist would be brought in to, and often when there were cases of as it were, the expert witness behaviour. Right. So this newspaper. It's very short. A boy's step in the right direction, as it were, the expert. Speaking about a 16-year-old boy. So this was accused of offences against two girls. A boy's step in the right direction. Psychologist said at late in juvenile course, previously he'd been found guilty of offences which suggested a homosexual nature. These latest offences said at late in juvenile course, step in the right direction. And this is a man who was accused of homosexual nature. these latest offences were at least evidence of a step in the right direction. You need to know about. And this is a man who was accused at the time attempted rape, nothing does. And I remember finding that and thinking, and I think if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know,
so they were happier that he
profession at the time.
That is so bad.
Nothing does. You know, and I remember finding that and thinking, as a full-blooded male, rather than dancing around the streets.
What the fuck?
So you know, you mentioned the police and various institutions don't come out of this book, as you can imagine, with their reputation intact. Does anybody come out of this well?
I think some of the gay men come out of it pretty well, you know, there are also. I mean, what I should say, I think some of the gay men come out of it pretty well, and catalogue of gloom. You know, there are also very funny bits in it. What I should say, because I don't want to make this sound as though it's entirely a sort of comic catalogue of gloom and doom. There are very funny bits. Clearly, I mean, actually, I find that. But you know, there were writers who were trying to write comic, like Angus Wilson, but you know, it's also deeply offensive homosexual men as but you know, there were writers who were trying to write. So there were quite a few writing novels that treated homosexual men. People like sort of John Gielgud, who you know was caricatures all over the press. So there were quite a few in a public novels. People like John Gielgud, who his dignity more or less all over the press. He never again talked about it in a public lavatory, and he did suffer a breakdown after his arrest. Emerged with his dignity more or less intact. He never again talked about it in public. But you know, he did suffer a breakdown. And what's interesting about that case is that a lot of these people, like Noel Coward, who said, you know, and what's interesting about that case is that a lot of these people, Worthing, who don't know Noel Coward, so that would be his matinee never admit to being homosexual. They must be very ignorant old ladies in Worthing, is all I can say for Noel Coward. So that would be his matinee audience. They must be very ignorant old ladies in Worthing, is all I can say for Noel Coward. Got into trouble with the law, or that some scandal had blown up. There was an idea that if you were a public figure, much more so perhaps if you were a politician, got into trouble with the law, if you were some scandal had blown up. But you know, it was the end of your career. Was rehearsing a play at the time, if you were a politician, was standing in the wings ready to go on when the play was actually the Gielgud was rehearsing a play at the time, and he British actress was standing in the wings ready to go on when the play was actually the first performance. Now, John, take Sybil Thorndike, just go on stage. British actress, and he walked on stage, and there was a standing ovation, shaking. And the interesting thing about that is it shows that just go on stage. While all the newspapers saying, and he walked on stage, and there was a standing ovation. A lot of the general public. And the interesting thing about that is it shows that. I mean, they always said while all the newspapers saying public opinion was against it, and actually public opinion. A lot of the general public had much less. I mean, they always said you couldn't change the law because public opinion was against it, and actually public opinion is always didn't really care too much. And in fact, this anecdote shows that there was, I say, at any rate, they'd have had a pretty thin time of it. Really cared too much about actors, directors, and stage directors who were gay were out of jobs. There was, I say, little theatre on in London. They'd have had a pretty thin time of it.
It feels very similar to now, really. Directors and stage directors of the government spout were out of jobs. Not in line with theatre on in London at all. But yet, when you look online, you just get surrounded by the darkness of that algorithm just firing hate at you. But in real life, it's not. It's not the way it seems.
I mean, that's when it took them a year even to debate the recommendations that with certain provisos. I mean, that's when it took them a year. The House of Lords actually debated it first, but when it eventually came to the Commons, it was introduced by Rab Butler, who was a famously, although the House of Lords actually debated it first, but when it eventually came to the Commons, politician, it was introduced by Rab Butler, he more or less started famously introduced debate by saying when famously liberal in the public opinion won't stand politician, and so he more or less started the introduced debate by saying no vote was taken. Public opinion, and it wasn't until 10 years after the Wolfenden Report. So we'll just talk about it. Homosexuality was had a debate. No vote was taken, and it wasn't until 10 years after.
Some Men in London comes in two volumes: Queer Life 1945 to 59, and then Queer Life 1960 to 67. What would you say were the most standout differences for queer people between those two times?
Well, I think there was a general, after the Wolfenden Report had come out, homosexuality was much more in the public eye. And I think by the 60s, there was a general, after the Wolfenden Report had come out, there was still people homosexuality was much more in the public eye. And I think by the 60s, because homosexuality was so much, as it were, in the air, there were still people being more prosecuted all over the place. But books because homosexuality was so much, there was a slight move being discussed. There were more homosexuality being applied to a psychiatric disorder coming out about it. There was a step in the right direction from not homosexuality being a crime to a psychiatric disorder. The idea that the swinging step in the right direction, they're in popular culture, swing sixties, where you let it all hang out. The idea sexual freedoms, the swinging 60s. Well, there were for heterosexuals, but swing 60s, you were still liable to let it all hang out, or sexual freedoms everywhere. In any well, there were for heterosexuals, right up until the end. You were still liable to a prison sentence or a hefty decriminalisation. Caught in any homosexual act, right up until I think that was the thing that I was quite surprised by, that Sergeant Pepper matters hadn't changed. I mean, the 50s were a very dark era, undoubtedly, and the 40s I think that was the thing that I was but I thought that slightly more matters hadn't changed. I mean, the 50s were a very dark era, but then of course you had the vassals as well. So we had but I thought there'd be slightly more being he was a more general liberal approaches, but then of course you had the vassals spying for Russia. So we had for the Admiralty homosexuals being and so all that blew up again. So it was almost just like going back to the 50s. So it was very much you'd have a couple of steps forward and then so all that blew up again. So it was almost just like going back to the 50s. I mean, I think so. It was very much what's interesting about the 1960s and then the whole pop era and it fashion took forever. I mean, I think it was much more sort of what's interesting about the 1960s is the whole pop era. Though Vince Men's fashion, Carnaby Street, homosexuality was much more to go and get your influential in those days. So Vince Men's shop in Carnaby Street, in Volume 1, main gay places to go and get your the peacock look. So people were even heterosexual men were not afraid to wear Volume 1. This did have an effect. There was the peacock look. So people, a lot of the even heterosexual men were not afraid to dress more flamboyant. All the managers, people like the Beatles, and a lot of all the pop impresarios, I think, were gay. That was partly all the managers, people like the Beatles, they had an eye gay for the sort of attractive young men that the young that was partly female. They were fans would. I think that's no coincidence. They had an eye for the sort of attractive young men. They weren't female. They were not fans would. I think that's no coincidence. And Joe Meek, who was but they weren't they were not producer. Protected. He'd been arrested for Joe Meek impotooning, and he lived in terror of people record ringing on the doorbell and he'd been arrested for threatening to expose tuning, and he lived in terror, paranoid. He thought everyone was ringing on the doorbell and threatening him, and ended up to expose not only shooting himself, he ended up shooting his land paranoid. So he thought everyone was plenty of sort of material, horrible tragedies, and ended up famous. Not only shooting himself, but also shooting his land.
With recent changes in legislation being proposed by the government regarding LGBTQ plus education in schools, I wonder what your steer is on. Do you think are you seeing similarities between the time that you've written about and the time that we're now in?
I don't really think. I think they're different. And I think what I really want this book to do is to educate people. Really think. I think they're different. And I think what I really want this book to do is to educate gay men, because I think now marry, which would seem inconceivable. Now there are even I know there are all sorts of threats and problems, and so many gay men have now married, which would seem. But I think particularly very even in the late 60s that perhaps don't know quite how this so many freedoms have been achieved. That I think particularly very young gay men fought to get us the freedoms that we quite how this happened. And so I would like I would like this to be a history that people who actually fought to get us the freedoms, and also not just gay people. So I would like histories. I would like this to be a history that people could read and learn from, and also whether you're gay or not. I mean, gay history is reading everybody's following some pop star, or it permeates whether you're gay or not. You either know to its great advantage. You're reading the cultural following some pop star, or it permeates life, and mostly to its great advantage. The cultural contribution.
Do you think?
Which I try and emphasise.
So you talk a lot about things being sort of written in code and Ivan Novello not being able to find the right girl and all that. I just wonder, do you think the public at large were able to see through that, or do you think they literally thought, oh, Ivan Novello, he can't get a missus?
I think there was a certain amount of naivety and a certain amount of wishful thinking. People who would want to. I think there was a certain amount. I mean, he had an enormous and a certain amount of wishful thinking and he was very attractive, but he had been in a relationship with someone. I mean, he had an enormous female fan base, and although and he was very attractive, but they had been in a relationship with someone since I think the reason he had been married was a fairly obvious one, and although not monogamous, but I also think that all this time shows that people didn't married was a fairly obvious much as the politicians thought they cared. I also think that there was quite a lot of, as long as it's not in my street as much as I don't have to watch it, that's fine. But there was quite a lot of, as long as it's huge popularity of people like Kenneth, as long as I don't have to watch it, that's fine. Popular entertainment. But you get just the huge popularity of people like Kenneth Williams, Courage, Frankie Howard, any of these people. Popular entertainment. It was there in the culture, and of course the highbrow novel, not in this volume, but in volume 2, we get Courage, any of these famous Round the Horn. It was there in the culture, and of course to extreme in this volume, in volume 2, Polarian, just so many famous Round the Horn, and that was hugely popular with extremely general audience, which was generally heterosexual. Just so many
You've compiled accounts from both sides of queer liberation.
Popular.
What's the most juicy bit of gossip?
Which was generally heterosexual.
Gay sex parties at the palace?
No, I think one juicy bit, which I mean, it's not a juicy bit, but the Chips Channon diaries that. No, I think one huge volumes that been a smaller version, but overseen by the Chips Channon diaries that were recently published. Chips Channon was Conservative MP, a smaller version overseen by his late extraordinary. The picture they give of the amount of gay sex going on among married politicians, extraordinary. Unmarried politicians. The picture they give of the amount of gay sex. One of the most famous cases, which married I barely touch as well as unmarried politicians in London, is extraordinary. And Lord Montague. One of the most famous cases, which actually I barely touch upon because it and indeed take place in London, was the Lord Montague trial, where Lord Montague, as was Peter Wildeblood, tried for sexual offences, and indeed was Michael Pitt Rivers, and all three men were accused, as was Peter Wildeblood, servicemen turned journalists evidence. So in other words, they gave evidence Michael Pitt against these men as long as they were prosecuted themselves. Two servicemen turned Queen's evidence. So in other words, they gave evidence against these men as long as they were doing prosecuted themselves. And lo and behold, we have Chips Channon, recording that he had an orgy, which included another. And lo and behold, we have Chips Lord Montague of Bewley, and recording that he had an orgy. That's quite interesting. And the amount, and indeed Lord Montague of Bewley, and the amount of sex that was going on. That's quite interesting. Guardsmen, and the amount of busyness of guardsmen, the amount of sex that was going on, escorting members of the royal family. Guardsmen were busy hanging around Marble Arch and other places. Guardsmen for hire, they weren't basically. And everybody knew the royal family in public. The army always busy hanging around Marble Arch and other places. Always denied that they used agents provocateurs, and everybody knew this was going on. The army always denied it, rather as the Metropolitan Police always denied that they used it's a bit like the Victorian period. We sort of think of the 50s as so repressed and dark and murky and it's a bit like the Victorian period. We sort of think of austerity, and that's true. But actually, there were a lot of people having a pretty good time. I'm glad to say, and that was the sort of most cheering thing. That's true. But actually, there were a lot of people having those that weren't having a good time. I'm glad to say, and that was the sort of most cheering thing. To find those that gay weren't having a good time and then ended up in the courts. But a lot of them just getting away with it. Obviously, people were just having
thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm thrilled, and I can't wait to dissect this entire book. both books, in fact, which are out now. So please grab a copy of it. Some Men in London. Peter Parker, thank you for being on a gay and a non-gay.
Thank you very much.
Which are out now. So please grab a copy of it. Some Men in London. Peter Parker, thank you for being on a gay and a non-gay.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. Yeah. I was in Ireland this weekend, and I was reading some stuff at Dublin Castle, and I found this little thing about the crown jewel. I don't know if you know.
Oh yes, it's
the crown jewels were stolen. And I was like, I wonder why. So they had never solved the case. So I googled it, and the rumor is that the guy that stole it was having a gay affair with the king's brother, and went and sold them to Amsterdam, the crown jewels. So that, because they didn't want that to come out, that he was having, there were all these gay orgies happening.
Yeah.
At Dublin Castle, they just wrote it off. And like, fine, never mind. Is that about right?
Yeah, it is right. Yes, I mean it's not a case I know an enormous amount about, but yes, I mean it's one of those really murky cases that are fascinating. Yeah, I've just actually done a piece for the Spectator on Guardsmen, because they want to wait till Volume 2 comes out to review it. So they won't run a review of Volume 1, but they said, would I like to write something related? And,
right.
And, going back to the Victorian period, and, people were picking up Guardsmen, in the 1850s and the 1820s. I mean, it's a very, very long... I mean, there's a whole... there was an enormous history before this book. I mean, the Victorian period in particular, I think, is absolutely fascinating.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. That's so exciting. Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
not at all.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Really
No, don't worry about that at all.
Hopefully they'll send us a copy of the book then.
They'll ask how it went.
Right.
So I will tell them that you want a copy as well.
Yes,
I think they came in last week, and some went out, and they're still processing. They're going down the list.
Amazing.
But I will remind them,
Thank
because
you
I'm
so much.
doing an event at Foyles with Dermot Hester, and
Right.
he said he hadn't had a finished copy yet, and he's a Penguin author, so
Yeah.
Oh, really?
but I think it will happen. But it
Amazing.
takes a bit of time.
And sorry for starting late, but
No,
thank you. That was
don't
excellent.
worry. That's
That was so
absolutely
good.
fine.
Are you doing a lot of press?
Yeah, well,
Just gonna do one.
between you and me,